Good evening, everybody, and it's a real pleasure tonight to introduce to you a colleague from Paris, France. He did his PhD in physics. He's been a professor of fluid dynamics at the Université Louis Pasteur in Strasbourg in France. He's also an expert consultant to the European Commission and to UNESCO, a project scientist here at UCI. He spent much of his career traveling around the world, directing large, multidisciplinary, multicultural groups, building water capacity for water governance in different parts of the world. So he brings to us tonight a perspective that is forged by having one foot in the academic world as a researcher and one foot in the policy world as somebody trying to promote sustainability. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jean Fry, who's going to talk about sustainable co-development, the case of the European Union. Dr. Jean Fry.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be with you tonight. And what we are going to, not to study, but at least to see and to discuss is sustainable development, but actually the real meaning of sustainable development and its limitations, and in a very specific context, which is international cooperation, and with a name a little different, which is sustainable co-development, to emphasize the cooperation part. So first, let me start with a question. Why has sustainable development been invented? Well, from 1 billion people in 1800 and 1.5 billion people in 1900, world population is now reaching, or even is over, 7 billion or more. Unevenly distributed, this demographic growth affects many developing countries, degrades life conditions, more particularly health, creates a number of hazards, and makes humanity discover that our natural resources are limited. A quick analysis shows that solution should imply some demographic control and an institutional and administrative reorganization with a better adapted legislation. Altogether, a reorganization of our society. And to provide the conceptual and methodological framework for this reorganization, the World Commission of Environment and Development of the United Nations, which is called the Brundtland Commission, has introduced, thank you very much, has introduced the concept of sustainable development, taking into account the interactions between the environment, the economy, and social dimensions. And in 1987, the following definition of sustainable development was adopted, the one here. A development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Immediately, that concept was a great success. Everybody started to talk about sustainable development. Everything became sustainable or had to be sustainable. But actually, not many people knew what it was. And when you were asking, how do you implement sustainable development? How do you change your own development concept? Not many people knew any answer. But of course, it is because the notion of development, go to the next slide, please. The notion of development, yes, the notion of development as such is complex, and sustainability itself is fuzzy. Next slide, please. Complexity. What is development? Professional economists will define development according to usually the political system they believe in. And of course, they will quarrel accordingly. For those who wish a definition, when I finish that talk, I can give, I would say, the classical definition of development if some of you want it. But what is important for us here is that each of us will have an intuitive idea of development. When we ask you what is development, you have your own idea. And it will depend on our social conditions and cultural habits, our immediate and longer term needs, and more generally, our conception of life. For instance, just let's take an example. For some people who live in Africa, for instance, development for them is to get a job in Europe, in France, for instance. We have many immigrants from Africa. A job, but just as a garbage collector, for instance, which means that for such a job, they will travel 5,000 miles and live far away from their families. And for them, it is development because it is better there in their own country. For others, living in Europe, for instance, development will be different. For them, it will be a country house and another car, or just a car. But for many, many, many people, too many people, development simply is the possibility of having something to eat on the next day. You see, so really the extreme of development. So it is complex. Now, fuzziness. Can I have the next slide, please? Fuzziness, first of all, sustainability is fuzzy because it is related to time, and especially to the long term. And human beings do not perceive time in the same way, depending on their culture, their history, their religion, their social organization. And for instance, the notion of long term will also vary accordingly. Just to take an example close to where I'm originated in France, people from the south of France have a complete different sense of long term, of time in general, than people from northern France. And that's a lot of jokes about that. But it's not a joke, it's very serious. And also, the long term will depend, in the same society, will depend on the object of concern. For instance, when you work on building a dam, the long term has nothing to do with the long term of a computer. It has nothing to do. but it's in years or tens of years or hundreds of years. We have dams in Europe built by the Spaniards in the 15th century. We are still there. So this is the long term. And we have computer that last 2 days. And it's still considered by Apple as, oh, it's great. You were lucky. Well, we can multiply the examples. Sustainability is also related to the adequate management of resources. By adequate management of resources, I mean that resources will be different, whether they are renewable, like water, not all water, but mainly water, or forests, or non-renewable, like oil. You are not going to manage them the same way. Finally, to add to the fuzziness, we have also cultural and linguistic differences, even in the same country. And again, I will take an example of France. To qualify sustainable, where we in America, we have one word which is sustainable, in France, we have two words. One is soutenable, which is close to sustainable, which means can be supported. And the other one is durable, which means on the long term. So various interpretations. So because of this complexity, because of this fuzziness, sustainable development is not easy to understand and implement. This is why in 1991, when the European Union decided to hold a ministerial conference on the sustainable development of the Mediterranean basin, inviting all the Mediterranean countries to Cairo in 1992, the task force in charge of preparing this conference, and it happened that I chaired that task force, was asked to propose what we called an operational definition of sustainable development, so it is something that we can use, and of course its implementation principles. Can we have the next slide, please? That's the only one? No, I mean, no, okay, come back. There has been a mistake. I will read it. Sustainable development is an economic development on the long term through, I will read it very slowly so you can write it down. Sustainable development is an economic development on the long term through a better definition of the relationships between civil society and public authorities, the research of adequate institutional, legal, administrative, and financial structures, and the direct participation of the citizens to their development by public debates and active citizenship. Anyway, I will send to Dr. Matthew this oral paper, and he can, of course, send it to those of you who want it. Yes, just if we could check, because it's a very complicated definition. I'm very surprised. Ah, yes, that it's there. It's the computer which is wrong, not me. Good. I breathe now much better, but I don't know what happened. I need a specialist. Maybe it's myself when I put it on that, because I'm always navigating between Keynote on Apple and PowerPoint on Microsoft. Ah, here it is. Thank you. To have the good specialist. So, okay, now you have it. Sustainable development is an economic development on the long term through a better definition of the relationships between civil society and public authorities, the research of adequate institutional, legal, administrative, and financial structures, and, this is very important, the direct participation of the citizens to their development by public debates and active citizenship. By the way, this last part is rather normal here in our country, in the US. But I can tell you that in France it is not. Public debate, active citizenship is now new, it's coming, but it's not as natural as here. That's a question of society, that's all. And what are the, so the next slide, please. What are the implementation principles? The implementation principles are the following: integrated management, good governance, responsible use of financial resources, sustainable management, not development, sustainable management, public participation, and political will. Now I will elaborate on these. Integrated management. Integrated management means that we adopt a multidisciplinary approach, taking into account science, technology, law, economy, and what is very important, because my example will be about that, history and culture, sociology, anthropology. We also, within this integrated management, associate the various natural resources to prevent their wasteful use and irreversible environmental degradation. For instance, some of you may be familiar with master planning. Master planning is one form of integrated management when you have to take into account all variables, or as many variables as you can identify. Now, good governance. Good governance is based on adequate institutional, legal, and administrative structures, demographic control, and, what is important, the role of public authorities, especially with respect to civil society. Responsible use of financial resources. That is, you will choose a general economic policy taking into account the interactions between sectoral economic policies, that is, for instance, agriculture, industry, transport, energy, tourism, which are the basic sectoral economic policies of a country. What is also important, the balance between the public and private sectors. And this is what I would say is more my personal opinion in economy. If possible, favoring a market policy regulated by some public action and the search for a balance between liberalization and planning. This is not accepted everywhere. But this is a view that has been developed in France to try to balance actually between a liberal market, a completely open market, and a planned market like we were used to it in the Soviet Union, which was, we know, a disaster. But there are discussions whether fully liberal is good or not. But okay, we can discuss that. But my personal position is a balance between the two. Then sustainable management means that we preserve the necessary technical means by correct operation, maintenance, renewal, things, and also to have adequately trained staff. Public participation was clear on that, public debate, active citizenship, and most important, the political will. Because without political will, you cannot do anything, and first of all, you don't have any money. So political will. Now we have to add also, so there will be the next series of slides. Okay. Countries are strongly interdependent, economically, environmentally, and even demographically. They are independent, economically, environmentally, and even demographically. But also many countries cannot act alone financially, and even sometimes scientifically and technically. They don't have the necessary competencies. So the international dimension is very important, which led to the concept of sustainable co-development. This was established through a series of research and development projects in several parts of the world. This was done that the development of the idea of sustainable co-development in France by a team under my responsibility within the Ministry of Public Works and Infrastructures, where I was an advisor at the time, and in connection with the Ministry of the Environment, of course, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we worked in Central Asia, and you see Uzbekistan, essentially, but also neighboring countries. I had to go to Kyrgyzstan also. But that was about all, essentially Kyrgyzstan. Kazakhstan, very little. Uzbekistan was really the... So in Central Asia, in the Middle East, we will come, and maybe the next slide, so we can, instead of reading that, so you see Uzbekistan, it's better. Uzbekistan, and I worked essentially near the Aral Sea, and that will be the example I want to develop with you. The Aral Sea, which is on, you see there, yes, the Aral Sea. Also in the very important part of Uzbekistan, which is not that well known by everybody, the Fergana Valley, which is between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Fergana Valley was very well known in the Middle Ages because this is where they had the most beautiful horses. And the emperor of China used to breed their horses there. But it's still very, very interesting, except that now it's really, you have many Islamists. That is very, as you know, it's a Muslim country, but Islamist in Fergana Valley for various reasons. There are, but okay, that's a fact. Then the next slide, you will see Uzbekistan a little more. So you see Fergana, you see Tajikistan, and I worked, as you can see, Urgench, Nukus, and we'll make an example of Bukhara, which is written Uzbek way, Bukhor, but it's Bukhara for those who know Bukhara, and Samarkand. But I worked in Bukhara. Then the next slide, the Middle East. You see the Middle East. I was concerned with Turkey, but Turkey and its Arab neighbors, Syria and Iraq that you don't see here, and Israel and its Arab neighbors, also Syria. Lebanon was not, because the European Union, I was there on behalf of the European Union, and it was not part of the negotiation. But of course, Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority, when it started to exist. Then the next slide, no, sorry, come back. Also North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, where I had to go. Then the next slide is Vietnam. And I worked in up there, if you see, Ta Noa. For those among you who know about Vietnam, Ta Noa. It's about 200 kilometers south of Hanoi. Then the next slide, the Indian Ocean and the little tiny island of Réunion, which is French, in Réunion, close to Mauritius, where they also needed sustainable development. Then the next slide, in Thailand, but in the north of Thailand, what they call the Golden Triangle. You see Chiang Mai, and it's further to the east. It is on the Mekong. You see the Mekong, the blue line. It's called Chiang Rai. And it was also to study the migration of the population coming from Xinjiang and going there with a major problem, which was the growing of drugs, of the opium and thing. And then the last slide, I worked in Russia, but essentially in Siberia. In Siberia, in Irkutsk, which is on the Lake Baikal. You should see it here, Irkutsk. And you see Novosibirsk, but north of Novosibirsk there is a little, not that little, but a town called Tomsk. I don't know if some of you have read Jules Verne. Nobody knows the French author Jules Verne? And too bad. Michel Strogoff. If you have read, some of you who know Michel Strogoff's family came from Tomsk, and he will see his mother there in Tomsk. Okay, that's Jules Verne. No problem. It has nothing to do with sustainable development. So this is where really, on these practical examples, that our ideas of sustainable co-development were developed. And now, let's see sustainable co-development itself. So the next slide on sustainable co-development. Sustainable co-development. Oh yes, I think maybe I will do it. Yes, it's a new dimension of international cooperation. And the definition is sustainable co-development is a policy of international cooperation. You can give me the next slide. For sustainable development based on international solidarity, mutual trust, and shared responsibilities, and which results in mutual benefits. So, the words which are important there is mutual trust, shared responsibilities also, we see that. Mutual benefits, of course, which is rather natural, but shared responsibilities, we see that. So in any case, the next slide, the principles. So the principles and instruments of implementations are to study, understand, and take into account the culture, the history, the social dimension, and the physical environment of the populations of each partner. Then, what is very important, and of course, collective preferences, real needs and priorities, means to identify what are the real needs of the population. Because very often you deal with political people who have their own agenda, which does not necessarily correspond to what their populations will need. So the whole idea of that sustainable co-development is to go to the population and understand what they want. And if they don't know what they want, then there will be a part of education also, to try to teach them that they may need that or that, they are not used to it. Education will have its part. The important aspect is no more assistant-assisted. It means that we have to get rid of the mentality assistant-assisted. That means that each partner will assume their responsibilities by taking part directly into the project. They have to mobilize their own financial resources, their own human resources, and they have to educate their populations. It's not like the World Bank does or whatever, that you just pour money in a country, and we know that very often it is the political establishments which takes the money, and they are lucky if they don't put it in Switzerland, but they take it. That is recognized. So it's really to ask each country to take part in its own development. And of course, then promote capacity building, professional training. This is very important. Stimulate, of course, long-term actions. And also, which is really important, it is to evaluate the implementation of the projects. It's not just to have the project done and that's it. We must have a follow-up and an evaluation. Okay, now let's take the next series of slides. I hope that we are not going to lose them. I want to finish, let's say, the last 15 minutes. I would like to discuss, to show you, yes, no, there is no. Yeah, that's it. That's it. I will now illustrate what I have said by discussing with you or showing you first an example where history and culture play a great part. All of you and all of us, we are familiar with the role of science, technology in development projects. But here I would like to illustrate the role of history and culture and how they can, history and culture, modify a development project. And we'll take the project I have worked there during 2 years, which is in Uzbekistan, which I have called Historic Reality versus Political Fiction, and I will tell you what it means. So let's go back, next slide, please. Let's go back to Uzbekistan, the other one where we see much better. Can I have the next one? Yes. Okay, but on the other one you saw the Caspian Sea, so it's important also. So we are going to study now the Bukhara region. Yes, Bukhara, a little further. Here, Bukhara. Many of you are familiar with the name Samarkand, Bukhara, which were emirates in the Middle Ages, and they, as you know, they almost conquered the world. Don't forget that the Mongols and the Uzbek are close to the Mongols. They came not far from Vienna. They came to Europe. Okay, so the Bukhara, let's study the Bukhara region. The Bukhara region has a semi-arid climate, received weak rains only, and the only usable waters come from a river called Zerafshan, which crosses the Bukhara Valley, and from groundwater. Therefore, agricultural development is impossible without irrigation. And irrigation, therefore, is an ancient practice. Can I have the next slide, please? This irrigation system was part of the cultural and social heritage of the region since the Middle Ages, and among others, regulated the access to water, the operation and maintenance of the canals used for irrigating, and the allocation of water. Furthermore, specific functions, administrative functions, related to water and water distribution were created, especially what you see here, the Arik Aksakal. Arik Aksakal in Uzbek. Aksakal means actually white beard. Actually, a white beard, somebody who has a white beard, meaning that he is a respected elder, an old man. If I grow my beard, it will be white because I'm a respected elder. I hope so. And Arik was the canal. So there was a function, a special function created in the Middle Ages called the leader of the canals, elected and paid by the farmers, by the peasants of the area, of the village. It is very similar to the magistrate of water of Valencia in Spain, which is also a well-known function for water. And this Arik Aksakal was taking decisions concerning the allocation of water. Well, in any case, it was an elaborate system of irrigation, and that enabled Bukhara to become one of the most brilliant cities of the regions of the time, and of the world, by the way. And the mastership of water resources constituted an essential element of the emir's power, and also a significant social factor. This is important. A significant social factor of Bukhara's daily life, because at the time, in the Middle Ages and later also, there were more than 100 basins in the city where the population would gather, essentially the male population, because again, it's a Muslim area in majority. You have also a Jewish population, or there was a Jewish population, much less now. But so they would meet and exchange. And I've personally experienced that, because there is one out of 100, there is one basin left, but it was great in the evening just to go, sit, and you discuss with the people. It's a part of social life of that town, and it's really, really great. So you imagine with 100. And the Emirate of Bukhara was very powerful, and it is known that it even challenged the British Empire at the beginning of the 19th century. It did not hesitate, I think, to kill one of their ambassadors, and the British didn't do anything, could not. But then, with the aging of the system, they don't renovate it. They did not renovate it, and so the power of Bukhara decreased, and the Russians came in and conquered it. It became a Russian territory in the mid-19th century. They did not change the water management system, but when they became Soviet, then they changed. when it became a Soviet republic, Uzbekistan, they changed. Because all of a sudden, it was decided that cotton production would be really the only one. There would be a monoculture of cotton. Who decided that? A guy whom all of you know, Mr. Stalin. He decided in the Kremlin, he never went there, he did not know anything about Uzbekistan, but on his map, he said, here we have, in Ukraine, we have wheat. Here in Uzbekistan, we have cotton. That's it. And he didn't know anything about water, he didn't care, that's it. So cotton monoculture was decided in an authoritarian way without taking into account the geographic constraints, the socio-cultural realities. And of course, what should happen, happened. Works were done too quickly without taking the local hydraulic capacities into account, without efficient drainage systems, and without preoccupation of the runoff, without any global vision. Which means that very quickly, they ran into water shortage, and of course, a salinity increase. There were solutions were tried, like a modification of the beds of the main river there, the Amu Darya, which is on the border between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan there, or even the Sir Darya, which is north in Kazakhstan. We don't go back to you will see on the map by yourself. But that increased the regression of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea depleted. And, of course, increased the salinity because the sea bottom started to appear and the winds would would erode and take the salt even to the Pamir mountain much further, almost to China. So, beside the monoculture of cotton implies a heavy use of fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, so significant pollution with disastrous health effect. And the area has been called a slow Chernobyl. So you imagine what it is. But, if most pollution aspects of the Aral Sea, from what I have said, are of, can I have the next slide, are of, you see the Soviet decisions, okay, we have seen it, so the next one also. So, slow Chernobyl, can I have the next one? Then most pollution aspects are of human origin, that's clear. But it appears that not all. And this is where I introduce the idea of political fiction versus historical reality. That is, I want to, with you, to explore the human causes of desertification on the one hand, as we did until now, versus the natural causes, because there are natural causes that have been neglected for some political reasons. And this is where a thorough exploration, can I have 10 more minutes? Okay, that will be all. A thorough exploration of the existing documents show that world-known geographers, and among them the French geographer Élisée Reclus, who is a well-known geographer for those who study geography, identify or have identified, and Élisée Reclus in 1877, so almost the middle of the 19th century, they have identified a general natural desertification process of the Aral Sea basin. I have that the original Nouvelle Géographie Universelle, because it happened that I'm collecting old books, and especially geography, and I have that the original publication of Élisée Reclus of 1877, and so I could read by myself in it, that Élisée Reclus mentions a significant decrease of the level of the Aral Sea and the disappearance of many lakes of the region in the 19th century. But also, Élisée Reclus has studied the diaries of travelers. We are here on the Silk Road. Many people have heard about the Silk Road from China to France through most of the world, I would say, bringing silk. So they have studied the travelers' diaries, and Reclus underlines the very probable complete disappearance of the Aral Sea in the Middle Ages, because the two main rivers, Amu Darya, Sir Darya, were going directly to the Caspian Sea, and not to that big lake, salt lake, called the Aral Sea. So already in the Middle Ages, we had an almost similar phenomenon as we have had in the 20th century, or and even now extending to the 21st century, a complete disappearance of the Aral Sea. And of course, it is because of the variation of the path of the rivers, for various reasons, also related to changes in precipitation in the Pamir Mountains, which feeds the Aral Sea basin, where the water comes from the Pamir. Of course, Reclus also mentioned in the 19th century intensive irrigation, aging of the irrigation system, and already a growing population. So, although cotton monoculture, decided by the Soviet government, clearly is a major actor in the desertification and pollution processes of the region, recurrent climate changes and ancient uncontrolled irrigation practices play a significant role in the region desertification. And of course, they cannot be fully attributed to the Soviet regime or the Russian presence. And this was a big political issue, because actually I went there at the request of the European Union to evaluate what kind of assistance the European Union could provide on that Aral Sea. I met, by the way, people from USAID, and I must say excellent scientists, really great scientists. You have great scientists at USAID. I was impressed by their knowledge, first of all, of the languages, meaning Russian, but Uzbek as well, and knowing the. So in any case, I had to go and do my report. I wrote my report on the coexistence of a human factor and a natural factor. It happened that I was in friendly terms with the Uzbek ambassador to Paris, so because we are friends still, I talked to him about my research and what happened, and he said, "Oh, please don't mention that, because we are just in the phase of negotiating with the Russians to have financial compensation for that cotton monoculture, and to have money to change culture, and we may have problems." I said, "I'm sorry, I'm a scientist," and this is where we come back to our policy science discussion of this morning. I'm a scientist. I have to do my report. The only thing I promise is that I let the European Commission know, the European Union know your position, and they will decide, the political people will decide whatever they have to do. But I cannot. I have to give my report. But you have to know that and be prepared with the arguments. And okay, it went rather well, the Russians did not fight the results, and they still, I think they still compensate. And in any case, there have been an international fund for saving the Aral Sea has been created, etc., etc. Well, the European Commission, the World Bank, and USAID are involved. But this was just to say, to illustrate the fact that when you really work on sustainable co-development, you have to take into account all the information that you may get from history, from geography, from now, but also from the ancient times, and try to analyze it. Because if you think that the Aral Sea disappears only now, it's wrong. It disappears also because of natural factors, and if you try to find a solution where you take into account only the monoculture of cotton, you forget about the natural desertification process, and sometime it will fail. Your solution will fail. And also it illustrates something else that we discussed with other people, some of them are here tonight, the relationship between science and policy, where you see that a scientist has his own views, but sometimes the political people, they adapt it. I mean, they have to adapt it for their political needs. And that was the case for the Uzbek negotiators with respect to the Russian negotiators. But it went well. I think I will stop here because otherwise you will really fall asleep because it's already 8 o'clock, and I prefer to have maybe, if we have time, I don't know, some discussion or some questions. Absolutely. Yes. If and speak rather loud because I have hearing aids, but they don't work necessarily very well. This is a great question. I had something for that. I skipped it at some time because of time. Absolutely. The co means that it goes both ways. It means, and this is where I said that we have to use, we can come back, well, it's difficult to come back to the thing, but we have to use the existing competencies of each partner. But it's not only, and you underline that, what we classically call from north to south. It's also from south to north and from south to south. And I will illustrate that to answer you. The example I worked on from south to north was Morocco and France. We had in France a very severe drought in southwestern France, where usually there is rain, and all of a sudden they were confronted to a drought. They did not know what to do. And as I was involved in that, I had the idea of asking Moroccan colleagues who know how to deal with drought, they are trained for that, how would you like to come to France and teach French engineers what you do when to deal with droughts? And it worked. It was not on money from the French government because it was a European Union initiative, but I got money, I got a budget from the European Commission, and I could organize a short intensive training course of Moroccan engineers teaching their French counterparts. We also, during the work, I mentioned the Middle East, that was also south to south. And I remember having convened a seminar, and it was seminar and combined with a teaching course, with a training course, I mean, in Cairo, Egypt, where the people who took part were Egyptians, of course, Israelis, Palestinians, Syrians, and this is very important, I will tell you why. Syrians and Jordanians, of course, and people from Turkey and Turks. Why do I insist on Syrians? As you know, there are absolutely no relationships between Syria and Israel. And it even can be dangerous for a Syrian to say that he met an Israeli. Yet, they were allowed by their government to be present in Cairo. What did I do? Because it was a little delicate to put them together. So I had a kind of room divided in two with a mobile wall, you see. So first the Syrian and other were on one side, the Israelis and Jordanians were on the other side. And at the end of the 4 days, we took out the wall and they were all together. And anyway, and I asked them, there is no physical danger for you? They said, no, our government knows it. So you see, and this was South-South, because we were just conveners, I mean European Union, facilitators. But the information came from the Egyptians teaching their colleagues, the Israelis teaching their colleagues, the Turks teaching their colleagues, and the Syrians bringing their own expertise, etc. And there was a kind of rotation of speakers. So you were absolutely right to point out that it is a very important part of the co-development. Yes.
So we talked about the importance of public participation, and I wholeheartedly agree with that, because that's kind of my dissertation. But I guess a lot of criticism of that was just an example of looking at voters' turnout, right? That there's public apathy, and what if the public doesn't want to participate? Then in that case, how do you force the public to participate and participate in deliberation and decision making?
Well, we are not an authoritarian state, neither the European Union nor the United States, so we don't force anybody. But we try to stimulate the interest, really. It's a problem, I would say, of slow education. But of course, they are invited to come. This happens very regularly in the United States. You can meet your representative also, the guy who represents you in Congress, or for instance, the water, just to take an example, the OCWE, Orange County, WD, Orange County Water District, regularly has public lectures, and they invite the public to visit their installations, they give lectures, etc. So you stimulate the interest of the people by also sending information to them, but it's never a must. So it's not easy. It's not easy. But for that, we have to do another lecture, which is on the water system. How the water resources, distribution, protection, etc., how is it organized? I mention that because, for instance, on the French system, it's the country is divided up into 6 water authorities, which are according to the river basins, and the public is officially represented through NGOs, etc., and they elect directly some representatives in the assembly directing, which is a kind of small of water parliament, we call it, which helps to direct the water authority, so the public. Orange County Water District, to take the idea of a water district, was first. The original idea was that farmers got together and put together a water authority. So here, they are really an expression of public will. You see, but it depends again on the organization, and and it depends on how you teach the people, whether you have courses, education, etc. So it's a very difficult question, I agree. But we have some solutions, but it's very slow. That's for sure. It's slow. You have a dissertation on that?
Well, can I ask a follow-up?
Oh yeah, it's up to you. It depends on your colleague if they let you speak.
So I guess when we educate the public, right, some critics may argue that, like, according to Arnstein's letter of participation, then we're just informing and educating the public rather than truly allowing the public to participate in the equal power status kind of.
But it depends again on the system you have, on the administrative and institutional system you have. It depends. Again, coming back to a system I know very well, it is the French system, I can tell you that the public is really participating because officially, and there have been a law in Parliament about that, they are represented in the water assembly, water authority assembly, officially. Otherwise, they use NGOs or associations. Through their NGOs, they can also participate. Absolutely, but it depends on the institutional system that you put together. And it's up to the political scientists, helped by the scientists, to put together a correct system of water management. Because out of nothing you cannot have people interested, but they don't know how to act, what to say, how to vote, whatever. You have to have a system, that for sure. And there are examples all over the world of existing systems which work more or less. You have also water authorities in England and Wales and even Scotland. Also, you have the water districts here in the US, etc. It depends on the system. So you have to study really the institutions.
Other question?
I'll ask. Now, speaking about institutions and water, it seems that your experience in Bukhara suggests that one of the most ancient form of government is actually designed to allocate water. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the white beard. Right?
The white beard, yes.
So, do you think that, suppose, given the water problems that we have today and potentially in the future, should then government systems, governance should be designed to anticipate that?
I don't get your
So it seems that the institutions that you found
that existed in the Middle Ages, that still exist more or less in Kyrgyzstan, for instance.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. It seems that they exist to allocate water.
Yes.
And as you said, mentioned here, now there are specialized institutions that deal with that, even in the West. Modern.
Yes, absolutely. In many countries. Yes.
But how they perform. It seems that we can do better. That's what I'm trying to say.
I'm
In
sure.
terms of governance.
Yes, I understand what you mean. Well, it's always a trial and error way of doing, because they start this. The Arikakshakal was in the Middle Ages. They had to put something because they needed strong irrigation to survive. The same in Spain. When I mentioned the magistrate of water, they had to put this together from really just by trial and error. It's an experimental way. But then it becomes systematized, so they can invent, especially the political scientists. We are training political scientists for that. Yes. That they try to imagine, to use what they know, what they have learned, but also what they know, what they see, to find new systems which are more efficient. And to give an example of, I come back to the French system. The French system of water agencies was adopted by law in 1964, so a long time ago, on the principle of the polluter pays, because it was to find the water authorities was not necessarily to really manage completely the water, but to find money to then prevent pollution or cures or rehabilitates. So they said the polluter will pay. That was the principle. And then they built a whole system on that. And then, not that long ago, I don't remember, I think in 2000, there were new laws coming, especially from the European Union. In 2000, general law of the European Union was adopted that has to be implemented in all countries. So there was, at the beginning in 1964, it did not work that well. But then in 72 and then 80, there was each time improvements, because people learn, they implement something, then they analyze what does not work, and they do better. It's really a scientific process. All scientists do that. We start with an assumption, we build a model, an experiment in a laboratory or a mathematical model to help, whatever. We experiment that on the model. What works, we keep it. What doesn't work, we come back. And we change our assumptions. And we evolve like that. It is the same process. Exactly. So maybe now I think that to speak of the Central Asian people, they are trying new systems, especially now that their countries are not related directly as they were during the Soviet regime, because they were part of the same country at that time. Now they are evolving a little differently, but coordinating themselves and trying to learn from the failures of the others. So there is an improvement. It's not perfect. I agree with you. It's not perfect, far from it, but it's good. And for instance, many people now all over the world have adopted the system of water basins. That is, that water has to be managed within a given basin, which and so that prevents what we talked this morning of transboundary aquifers that are managed in one way in one country and another way in another one. They are managed inside the unit of management is the basin, because all the water stays in the basin, except those that goes to the sea, but that's different.
I think we can have one more question. Sure, go ahead.
Yes. So as an expert yourself, what advice would you give to other experts, let's say physicists or geneticists, that may be skeptical of local knowledge or unwilling to accept the credibility of local knowledge?
I would give the advice of first studying trying to understand. First of all, ask, why don't you believe? What are the results of that local knowledge? Is it because if you have a local knowledge and it works, why should you can trust? So I would say first listen and study what's going on. And this is what we did. This is what I did, for instance. Not long ago I was in Kenya. I stayed in a village with the Maasai, as you know, the Maasai in Kenya. And I was amazed at the way they knew how to handle their groundwater. They had problems because they had no money, they had no technical means to do, but theoretically they knew as much, they knew as any hydrogeologist. They knew exactly what was going on with their water, with their groundwater. Why in that well they had nothing, in this well they had groundwater. You see, and they were just simple farmers, simple peasants, with their camels and whatever. And they knew, and very well. But what they needed, by the way, they didn't have. That was money, was funds. This is what when I went back to Nairobi, what I told the authorities. And they need also in that area, they needed some training to transfer their knowledge also. But you have to trust the people. The one thing that co-development, sustainable co-development teaches you is, I had it written somewhere, mutual trust. You have to trust the people, but you have to be yourself that they trust you. You have to show that they can trust you and understand and live with them. That my thought is that you have to stay some time with them, with the people. You cannot just, if you go to Kenya, you just cannot stay in a big hotel in Nairobi and do your homework. It doesn't make sense. You have to go in the field. It's not necessarily that you learn, but at least you make the effort. And the people really like. They know that you take them seriously, which is the case. And I did that also in Uzbekistan. I went I was in a village in one of the deserts, but near the Aral Sea, see the people and discuss with them. You have a problem of language also. I use an interpreter. That's sometimes difficult. In Kenya, it was easier because they spoke English, at least some English. This is also a problem. You have to know the language. Okay, you are all convinced by sustainable co-development, I think, and we'll see you in the field now, very often all over the world. Your students will be all over the world now.
They will be all over the world. So please join me in thanking Dr. Free for...
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to be with you and so many young people, and with my white beard, I need that.